Hi you guys, so today we are going to be doing this easy tide pool with starfish. I started off by doing some sketches of starfish and some circles for pearls. Now I'm going in with my masking fluid and I am filling those in. I am using a mandala dotting tool for this. I recommend using these. They come in a pack of 6 from a craft store. I got mine from Michael's, but you can get them pretty much anywhere. So once that dries for about 10 minutes, we're laying down a light sheer sandy beige from that watercolor palette. And I like using the sandy beige in almost all of my watercolor paintings. If I'm doing like a beach scene or if I'm doing a underwater scene, because it layers really nicely and it's very forgiving and it doesn't get muddy. So I'm going to end up laying that down and blending it out with a fluffy brush around all the starfish and all of the pearls. Okay, so here what I am doing is I am laying down a minty aqua green, and I'm laying down this color really roughly and loosely because it's just going to serve as a base for the water. Don't worry about it being perfect, or if there's lines and it's kind of choppy, all of that is going to get covered up. And in a little bit you're going to see me throw in a dark turquoise in various places, like in the corners. That's going to add some dimension and some more depth to the water. So you'll see me moving my brush kind of irregularly I am just kicking up some color off of the paint that we just laid down. This is a technique I use in some of my ocean watercolor paintings. It just adds some light value and some movement without using masking fluid. I didn't want to use too much masking fluid in this because I didn't want the video to get too long. So that's a nice effect to use if you ever do an underwater painting. So that's just what I'm doing here, and you'll see me do it throughout the video. Okay, so here we are going back in with that same sandy beige that we used around the starfish and the pearls. I like to lay this on top of watercolors, so you can either lay it underneath in the beginning of a painting, or you can also layer it on top. It is super forgiving, and you can see that it adds this just nice warmth, almost as if the sand is glowing from the sun. And I'm only centralizing that beige in one part of the painting just so we can add that light value. And then I'm going back in and just kicking up a little bit more of that paint to get some ripples and some movement. I just wanted to add a quick tidbit. If you're ever doing this technique and you notice that some of the colors kind of wanted to melt together, or you get some bands of white that you picked up that are really thick and chunky and you don't like it, like there's one in that far bottom right that I'm not digging at all, it's not a big deal because we are also going to be utilizing gouache, and we're also going to be layering in some dark colors here in a little bit. So that's not a huge deal. We can fix that. So yeah, you see me going with that turquoise right there. And we're actually going to do that throughout the ripples of the whole painting. I'm just using a standard turquoise. I'm not mixing it with anything. And I'm also going to go in with a purple gray for the shadows. I opt for either a purple gray or a brown gray for my paintings, depending on what type of a vibe I'm going for. Because this is kind of a lighter painting, I'm opting for a light purple and gray instead of a gray and brown. But I always mix gray into my shadows with some purple because I feel like it really cools it down. Okay, so here we are just dipping into our white Himi jelly gouache, and we are doing the upper ripples. This is going to add even more movement, and I mentioned it before, you can go over any spots that you're not super thrilled with, and you can throw these in however you want. You don't have to do them exactly like mine. As long as you get the concept and you're putting them all over those white bands and that turquoise that we laid down, it should work out really well and give you some really nice glowing water movement. Okay, so here I'm just grabbing a basic turquoise. I'm not mixing it with anything, and I am just going to be throwing in some pebbles. I opted for a turquoise because I wanted them to look like they were kind of just sitting on the sandy bottom with the water on top. And we're just kind of laying those in that beige base. I wanted it to look like a tide pool, as if this was the more shallow area and the blue is the deeper parts. So you see me take my brush and I'm going over those pebbles. What I'm doing is I'm taking a slightly damp brush and I'm just kicking off a little bit of color from those pebbles. This is a technique that I do to create highlights. It's kind of the same principle as when we laid down those ripples. So I do that in a lot of my paintings. And I'm also grabbing that white Hami jelly gouache and I'm going over the pebbles directly that we just laid down, because that's going to make them look like they're underwater and the ripples are glowing. Okay, so here what I'm doing is I'm removing the masking fluid. You'll notice that when I use my finger to do this, I'm doing this rolling motion. So I'm just slightly picking it up as light as possible instead of just ripping it up like a band-aid. In the past, I have removed masking fluid and I have ripped my paper in half, and that's really frustrating when you're happy with a painting and you worked really hard on it and you rip the paper. Once you rip the paper, that's pretty much it. The whole painting is done and it cannot be salvaged. If I get a tiny rip, that's okay. I know how to salvage that. I'll go over that in a later video, but yeah, rule of thumb, just roll the masking fluid. And as you can see with like the bigger starfish, if you have a bigger piece that you've used masking fluid, roll it towards the middle. That is the biggest trick that I could recommend, because once you roll it to the middle, you're going to get one continuous piece of masking fluid that can be picked up, and because it's rolled, it's not stuck to the paper anymore. Okay, so here what I'm doing is I'm taking a detail brush and I'm dipping into that white gouache, and we're just doing these little dabs of white. Some are big, some are small, and that's going to be where we place some sparkles. The sparkles aren't super complicated. Once I lay down those dots, I just do 4 equal thin lines going across them, kind of like little plus signs, and I will blend out those little lines as I feel like is needed, but that's all I do here. tidbit, whenever I add sparkles and I want extra highlight, I go in with my Posca water-based marker. It's a paint marker. I use that almost in all of my paintings. It's a really small detail, but it makes a huge difference. Okay, so here we are working on the pearls. I am just going in with a bluish pink, and I am putting that on the outer rim. And we're also going to be adding some aqua green, some blue, and some golden yellow. So a general rule of thumb with pearls, as long as you add a warm color and a cool color, you can pretty much add any other color you want, and it's gonna look like the pearl is glowing. You can use anything you want. And when I just place it on that outer rim, that's the first step. And then what I'm gonna do here in a minute is I am going to be using a fluffy brush and going along those harsh lines, and then I'm just kind of feeding my brush towards the middle, and you can see that it leaves that white, which is a nice light value for the pearl, and it looks like it's just kind of glowing and the sun is catching it. And any parts that I feel like we lost, I'm just going in with a really sheer blue and placing it in that area of the pearl. So here I am going in just with a gray brown and using a detail brush, and I am just kind of adding a little bit more value to the shadows just so the starfish look like they're just laying on the sand. And I'm also lining it around the pearls. I'm not going over that shadow base that we already laid down. I'm just giving it a really slight hint, and I'm not really blending out this line at all. I'm just kind of lightly lining it along the edges. Okay, so we are just adding in a little bit more turquoise for the final part of the movement of the water. I'm not mixing the turquoise with anything, and I'm just following it along those ripples. You can do this as irregular as you want. You get the gist. It's going to add movement, and then we will move on to the final steps of the painting. Okay, so we're moving on to the starfish. I had this whole segment of what I did with the starfish, like from beginning to end, but it got cut out and my iPhone storage is being really weird. So bear with me, you guys, but I'll explain what I did here. So to get the base of the starfish, we used a yellow ochre, and for the red, we used burnt sienna and a fire red. And it creates that nice warm red. And then I am going in with the yellow ochre and a kind of just a golden orange. It's not quite orange, but that's gonna give us a nice shadow as if the sun is only hitting one side of the starfish. If you guys are here with me at the beginning of this journey, regardless of how really bad I am at tech, I really appreciate that. I promise I'll figure it out, because for me, I am more art inclined and creative. I am not a tech person, so I'm gonna do lots of research. But anyways, you just see me adding in that golden color, and same concept on that small starfish. Okay, so here we are dipping into our gouache. We are grabbing this really light yellow. It's not necessarily a neon yellow. It's almost like a really bright lemon yellow. And instead of using that usual custard yellow that I usually opt for, I'm using this brighter one just because I want the sun to really look like it's glowing on top of that starfish, and adding highlights and almost as if it's kind of poking out of the top of the water. And notice on that shaded area, I'm not adding a ton of it because we don't want to go over that golden color that we laid down. And then same thing, I'm going to add it on that smaller starfish in the areas that I would like to highlight. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're picking that Posca white marker up that we used earlier, and we are adding details in the starfish. If you don't have this marker, it's fine. You can just use watercolor or you can use gouache. I like using these markers because it's a really easy way to add highlights, especially after the watercolor is dry. It stands out really, really nicely, and I feel like it adds a certain level of kind of realism, like it looks a little bit more realistic. It just depends on the look you're going for and how pronounced you want details to be. If you wanted these details to be more sheer, I would recommend watercolor, because obviously white watercolor dries somewhat sheer over colors, but this is gonna dry matte, and that's what I am going for. I'm also going in and I'm adding some highlights back into those pearls just because I'm neurotic like that, and I felt like they needed more just because. So yeah, we're just adding in these white details. So I am happy with how that looks. We're going to go in and lightly remove that masking tape, and we are done. And I'm like, ta-da! I'm very happy with it. See you next time.